Hey there.
Another episode of The Sweet Spot. And, this week, we're going to go a little bit out of the box. I don't want to scare anybody. Paul sent me a text message a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. And I don't know, Paul, do you think you could do a reasonable job of relaying that text message? It was yours. I don't want to have to try to remember it, and I won't do it well.
Let's see if I can. So we have recently have had several conversations with individual clients separately and together. And I've made some interesting observations, or at least I felt they were interesting, on how we both present. In fact, I've seen us do back-to-back presentations where we're both kind of in the back, right? We're the audience, we're listening, and some of them were participating, but let's say that we've had some good exclusive time on content. Some of that content has been sort of strategy focused. Some of that content is based on how do you operate IT. Some of that content's based on, portfolio to which we sell, but it's all reasonably technical, but the audience tends to be executive. And I think here's my observation. We have a very distinct, different approach to presentations, a very distinct difference in how we have conversations with clients. And I think that's best described by talking about two different comedians. All right, so I'll start with me and I'll end it with you. So my approach in presentations tends to be, I don't want to say rehearsed, but I do want to say practiced, right? So I have a perspective, a theory, a philosophy on technology, or just general opinion on a particular trend or technology or operational method, or just how people think. I've probably written that down in a blog. I've probably created 4 blogs on the topic. I may have built a presentation, a full deck on that. I may have presented bits and pieces in different presentations just to sort of test the audience to say, does this perspective or point of view make sense? And then eventually I'll create a whole talk track on it. And I'll say, here's a 10 to 15 slide deck, and I'll be able to record that and repeat that relatively close. We're probably 80 to 90% sameness every time I present, even though I might have different audience lenses, right? If I have a hospital audience, then I'll have a healthcare lens. If I have a manufacturing audience, then I'll have a manufacturing lens. But for the most part, it's pretty close to being the same. And I have a general understanding on when the audience is going to nod and when they're going to laugh and when they're going to appreciate, its truthiness. And it tends to do well. And what I like about it mostly is that I could easily repeat it at a dime's notice. It doesn't require any planning. And that there is an ability for other people to learn and understand and present it, even if it's not the same level of enthusiasm, at least it's the same words. So that's me. So I call that the Jerry Seinfeld approach, right? This is what he does. He writes out his content, he tests them, from stage to stage, from little club to little club. He hones an entire act and then goes and presents that act multiple times to much bigger venues, tens of thousands of people, and it is pitch perfect, word perfect every time. If you were to go back to a Jerry Seinfeld comedy, you will hear the exact same jokes and they will still get the exact same laugh. However, that is not how you present. you present distinctly different. Okay. This is how I would measure it. So you read the room immediately. So you'll walk into a room, you'll get an appreciation for who the audience is, and you will create, I'm going to call it an agenda in your head. You're going to prepare an agenda, say, here are the 3 or 4 things I want to be able to say based on the people that are in the room. Every room will be different, and therefore every agenda will be different. And if every agenda is different, then every story is different. You then create a story. I don't know if you really do this in real time or not, but I can feel the story come out as you're going. You will have a couple slides behind you, but the slides aren't important. In fact, you've presented very effectively without slides altogether, but then you will jump in. You will start in with topic A. You will provide a deep sense of knowledge on that topic. You'll go into this cave, into that cave, and you'll deep dive into this hole. You may never come out of that hole, but eventually you'll exhaust that particular topic. You'll move on to another topic, and you'll do that exact same thing until kind of the time is permitted. It is you get the same amount of nods. You get far more educational value out of it. I've seen standing ovations for you, and they feel that this has been a deep, enriching experience every time you're in the room. The downfall of that approach, of course, is that it's not rehearsable and it's not repeatable. And it would shock me, because I've never witnessed it, you be able to say the same story in the different rooms back to back or ever. In fact, every time I see you, it's a new experience. However,
Yeah.
I've learned something new. I like this is the Robin Williams approach, right? You're going to get a different show every time you see it. If you see 5 in a row in the same day, they're completely different 5 shows. You will get 5 hours worth of interesting content instead of the same content 5 times. That's how I see it. I don't. What do you think? Do you observe the same?
That's 100% true. And the weird part is, like, I'm a theater actor by trade. Like, if I was to pick one thing that I'm most like actively educated in, it would be theater. And in theater, you don't really improv.
No.
And yet professionally, I continually improv.
So how did you make the change? Like, there's clearly a purposeful change there.
So no, it wasn't actually purposeful. It was an exercise my dad would do. My dad was a theater major in college, who became a lawyer and a computer programmer, and kind of got me down my career path. We started a company when I was 11, and I had to present to school board. The school was one of my big customers, and my biggest by far at that time. I was presenting to my school board when I was in high school on the largest IT projects that they would have at the time. This was not a big school, was not a big school district, was not, it was relatively early in tech. And the only way that I could carry that was because they would just, you're 15 at the time, 16 maybe. You'd get eaten alive if you didn't absolutely unequivocally know the material. And so I wasn't allowed to have a rehearsed pitch. I was just told to talk and let your knowledge carry the conversation. And so from about 15, 16, that's how I started presenting to this kind of audience. And it never really changed. But I got better at it. Like, I really focus on figuring out who's attentive in the room, like who is my most engaged audience and who's my least engaged audience. What are the things that resonate with my most engaged audience members? And then do they also resonate with my least engaged? Is there anything that I'm saying that can perk the interest of my least engaged? Right? The middle's the middle, and you're never gonna, like, when you fight, you never fight for the middle, you fight for the edges. So,
right.
So, how do I keep my engaged audience engaged, and how do I really focus on trying to bring the not engaged into the conversation? It's why it's never the same twice, because the audience is never the same.
Do you have like an agenda in your head? Like, you've got 30 minutes of talking. Do you have an outcome you're trying to get to, right? Do you want to be able to say these 5 things? Are you trying to get into these, 6 caves? Are you trying to address 2 issues? Like, what is that cross your mind, or are you just going with the flow?
It's one of 2 things, right? It's either I go in with it's a soft agenda. I never have a hard agenda. But I go in with, like, I think these are the 5 things I'd like to talk about. These are the 3 things that I think are important, but all of them are story-based. Right. So I think this story would go well. Like, the audience at 2:00 versus the audience at 4:00. The audience at 2:00 loved this story. They seem to be a little on the fence about this story, so I'll swap it out with another one. And I always go in with more topics than I get to. Yeah. Like, I always go in thinking I'm going to hit more topics, and I don't hit more topics.
I would say it's one of the bigger differences between how we present. I tend to have one story, and I have this big macro story, and I'll go through the nuances of that story. I'll walk through it page by page because I know how I want to get to the end. Whereas you're going in with 20 stories that you're going to pick, in real time, depending on sort of where you want or how you see the audience reacting to your initial stories.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, where you don't have the bigger story. Like it's very rare that you're coming in with, here's my 8 chapters. I'm going to go through chapter by chapter. You're choosing your own adventure.
Oh yeah, I have ADD way too bad to do one story. Like there's no way. I can't write a novel. Like I'm a short story kind of guy. And the weird thing is I don't like to read short stories even a little bit.
Right.
But I would be much better at telling short stories, right?
Right.
As well, you know, and I've brought it up before, the biggest hobby activity that I do is Dungeons and Dragons. And it's funny because Daryl Kent, who is another coworker and friend of ours, Daryl Kent is the other DM in our group. We have 2 games going at any given time. Daryl runs all of his stuff based off printed modules. Somebody else printed it. He links them together, but you know, his stuff is a pre-made map, a pre-made thing. Like it's all fairly well defined for him. Mine is done week to week on a series of Post-its just like this. And the Post-its are written in real time.
Right.
Right. So what happened last week, I'll go over that at the beginning of every session. Like I make notes afterwards. And then I go, okay, cool. This is where you are. What do you want to do? And based on what they want to do, I generate characters, I generate storylines, I generate directions, and they may turn into bigger things. Like I don't necessarily end it at the end of every week, but I don't go in with a preconceived notion. And that's kind of how I present, right? Here's a scenario. I'd like to get through these 3 or 4 things. But if the audience is engaged and the audience starts asking me questions, I can't guarantee that that's where they're going to want to go. And my goal isn't to get through my presentation. It's not to necessarily educate. It's to have them ask questions. And I
actually find you're more successful with the distractions, where I'm far less successful with distractions. Right? I'm far more successful in a lecture series. Right? I can talk for 30 minutes. I can go for an hour of a straight story and go through the process and have people understand and write down what I want to do. But if I get a question or 2 or 3 in between that makes me veer off, it's really difficult to get back on that track again. Whereas you've decided to get off the track and you may never come back again, and that's fine. You're comfortable never coming back to the route.
and it's often harder for me to come back.
Right.
Like I'm happy to, I tell people all the time, I'm happy to go down whatever rabbit hole you wish to go down yourself. Some customers it works really well with, some rooms it works really well with. You know, I've developed a personality, right? So even if you're not totally enjoying the rabbit hole, I tend to try to be entertaining. Like I'm happy to insert jokes. I'm happy to, you know, the challenge is, for me, really, and this happened when we were in Dallas. If
the stadium,
if the customers ask no questions, if the audience has no questions, they have no comments, they don't want to double click on anything.
Right.
I can also run out of steam 10 minutes early.
Right.
Especially if I'm concerned about like if you give me an hour and I'm the only speaker, no problem, never run out of steam. But if you give me 30 minutes. And you want me to end at 22 to give time for questions, I'm probably going to end at 20 or 24, right? And if for some reason there's no questions, what do you want me to like? I can't launch a new story now. We're at 22 minutes, you know.
That's right. You're missing the cue.
Right. And so then there's no way anybody, like I get asked all the time, can you give me your deck? Sure. I don't know what you're going to do with it. It's
won't actually help you because I only got to slide 3.
Well, you did a really good talk, and I'd really like to have your speaker notes. There aren't any speaker notes. Like I can't do this twice.
Right.
I can't even repeat what I said 2 sentences ago. I don't even know what it was. Like, I hope you're recording this.
Describe the room or situation that works best for you, and then describe the room or situation that works worse for you.
So the room that works the best for me is one that I can warm up. I very much treat it like a one-man show or a comedy set. The rooms that absolutely work the best are when I get the opportunity to warm up the room. I get to come out, I get to kind of MC myself.
Right.
Because especially if it's when people are filtering in, hands down the best. Because I'll talk to people. Like I'll start to establish a rapport, and I'll ask them like, why are you here? Where are you from? What do you do? Like those sort of things. Because I can then pepper them. It's honestly, you talking about it like a comedy show really kind of nails that experience, because that's kind
Mhm.
of how I approach it. And then it's absolutely, it's little pieces of stuff, right? I'm going to tell a completely different story in Dallas than I would in New York.
Right.
The audience is different, right? Their socioeconomic climate is different. The business that they're in is different. I don't look at it as healthcare versus finance, although that is definitely a piece of it, right? But even to the point where jokes, kind of the humor that I add goes over different in New York than it does in Dallas. They have a different sense of humor, the politics of it and everything. And so, yeah, that makes a huge difference to me. And if I get the ability to warm up the room and they're not warming, that can be discouraging, we'll say.
So that what's the worst situation then? The worst position to be in?
I'm the fifth speaker in a room of 2,000, and the speaker before me was really dry.
I see.
Maybe. Like, there's pluses. I've had that go really well, where you get a sense of relief from the audience. But let's say I'm the fifth speaker of the day. I'm the speaker right before lunch was dry, and they've come back from lunch. That would be the worst room, right? I don't have the opportunity to warm them up. It's a huge room. They're already discouraged by the prior speaker. They just had a break and now have to kind of put back on the armor of listening to someone that's boring. And then I have to kind of work harder to get them kind of quieted after lunch. And then I have to work harder to kind of engage them.
Right.
And because there's no routine for me. It's like I'm putting myself out there. I can't use the comfort of a script to kind of push through.
And I am the opposite to your exact answer to that. So I hate warming up. I find that incredibly difficult to do. In fact, I almost insist that somebody else introduces me so that they have a means to calm the crowd, to get attention, to get people sitting, to get an appreciation for who I am and the position I might have. That's way more important to me.
Oh, I'm 100% the opposite. I don't like it when people introduce me. Like, I much prefer somebody just goes, "Hey, your next speaker is Howard," and I come out.
Right.
I will do my own intro. I will deliver I'll do all of that. I'm totally fine with that.
I see. But I can handle a dry audience. So let's say they just came in from wherever situation they are and somebody has calmed them, their start, and they still might be yawning. It might be the end of the day. That's all okay, because I do my best to project a level of enthusiasm to get their attention, right? I speak slightly faster than usual and much louder than usual, and I use my hands a lot, and I really walk the room, right? I'm very rarely standing in front. I can't stand at a podium, and I'm walking the room, especially if it's only 20, 30 people. It's easy to walk the room, much more difficult with 5,000 people, as you can imagine. But I certainly walk the stage, right? I push as much energy out from me as much as possible in order to create the energy in the room. So I find the dry room fun, right? In fact, the raucous room is probably more difficult for me because they're not attentive enough for the things that I'm trying to say to get any nuance in the conversation that I have.
I've seen you do that.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to watch, because I've seen you do that. I've seen you get up on stage in a room and I'm like, oh, they're not attentive at all. And you go. And what's amazing about it is it's almost like, it's like a train, right? The train is at the station. You can hear it go, right? And then it's, you get two horn blasts and you go. And I'm like, oh yeah, nothing's gonna happen. And before long, they're running and leaping on the train.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have never, ever, ever watched you present where at the end of it, I'm like, oh yeah, he lost half the audience.
That's right.
Opposite. He started without half the audience and pulled half the audience in. And the routine is so good. It's so polished. It's so, like, I'm genuinely envious of your ability to just do that. Like, for me, it's all, I pull as much from the audience as I push to the audience. And for you,
right,
you're like,
right.
Look, if you're not smart enough to keep up, I don't know what to tell you. We're going.
That's right. We're rocking. I got 30 minutes and I'm talking for literally 30 minutes.
Right. And this is good stuff. So if you're not paying attention, that's going to be your loss at the end of it. Like, I don't know.
Right. The only engagement I really add to my presentations is acknowledgement, right? So I will constantly say, does this make sense to you? I'm looking for you to physically nod to me. everything, what I just said, does this resonate? In fact, I use does this resonate all the way, just to make sure that they're at least at the right chapter, right? I can't lose them, right? I have to be at the right chapter, because if I keep going ahead, then they're going to lose the story completely. Whereas with you, the stories are nice and small and controllable. And if you move to another story, it may or may not actually tie to the previous story. So it doesn't really matter. You're making a different point. Therefore, they can catch up if they had to. If anybody walked into the room for you halfway through, they would still get value. Versus, I fear, if they're walking in halfway through me, they're missing too much to appreciate the end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that's wholly accurate. I do think they'll have a better time halfway through my style. Because to your point, right, all of my stuff is broke down. And while there is still a larger journey there, it's not like yours is absolutely 100% a one journey, beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
Mine is one journey that you don't know it's been a journey until hopefully the very end.
Right.
Right. But if you just come in for the first story, that's good. You can leave and you'll still get the first story's value, because that story will end.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now let's make this interesting for our audience. And the reason that
tell me it hasn't been interesting for the first 20 minutes.
No, I think it's been interesting, but but it has to be valuable too, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the value of this is, right, you and I have very similar jobs. We do very similarly the same thing. And I will say, when we've got up and had different time slots, same topic.
Right.
That has happened, right? Paul's doing 101 at 2, Howard's doing 101 at 4. Right. Like he's got that set or that day, right? And we'll be at the same thing. And what's interesting about it is, while we don't say the same words, like our stories aren't the same, our methods aren't the same, by the end of it, you get the same value out of it. Mm-hmm. Right? When it's all said and done, we go about it the same way. We arrive, we start at the same train station, we end at the same train station, right? Same start, same destination. Right. And it's neat because we often talk about how if you need one of us for a webinar, if you need one of us for a roundtable, if you need one of us for a customer event, we're somewhat replaceable. You're going to get the same story. You're going to get the same knowledge. You're going to get the same information. And yet we do it completely differently. And I think the important part for our viewer is there isn't just one path. There isn't just one journey. And if you're really, really, really good at the Jerry Seinfeld, if you're really good at developing a patois, at developing all of this work around a thing, really knowing it, really understanding it, really having the patois down and delivering it, that is exceptionally useful. It's a fantastic way to go about it. It accomplishes the job. You can have a whole career on doing it. Yep. If, however, you've got ADD, you're like Robin Williams, and you don't like a script, you can absolutely do that. And it works so well that two people that do those things so incredibly opposite can in fact address the same audience, can in fact hold the same audience, and in fact deliver the same message. And I think that's a really valuable, really important kind of piece of conversation, right? There's not simply one journey. I think too many of these things, it's 80% the same journey. And in this case, it's 100% not the same journey. It's just the same destination.
So I agree with you. That's 100% true. But I think external factors make that as true as anything else. So it's not just because we have different styles, but however deliver the same message. I think we have the same types of personal experience, the same types of work experience. And Absolutely. In fact, we share, 80, 90% of the same perspective, point of view. Interesting pitch, which might be unique than a corporate pitch. Like we're relatively close in just the spin, let alone the actual words that we use. Oh, that might not be true with everybody. Right?
No, and I'm not saying that you could take any two people with two different styles, give them the same talking points. I'm just saying, like, if only you existed at this company or only I existed at this company, we'd still be successful in what we do. Right. The fact that you and I have those similar things and yet a different approach makes us more successful. But if you come in with whatever your experience is, whatever your, what got you there, what made you an SE, what made you a director, what made you whatever it happens to be, and you're a Jerry Seinfeld or you're a Robin Williams or you're a Bill Hicks or whatever it is that gets you up on stage and how you've developed your personality, whatever it is can be made to work. Now, I think that's the important part, right? And I will say that neither one of us do no work. Like, it's not no work for either one of us to do what we do.
No.
It is exceptionally different work.
Right.
How we go about doing that is exceptionally different, right?
Right.
There was
so talk about prep. That's a good talking track. So talk about prep. What does your prep look
like? My prep is as wild and varied as my presentation style. Right? My prep isn't just one thing. My prep is if I've got a talk that I'm going to do, I'll spend, let's say I know the conference season is coming up and the big conversation point at the conference is going to be COVID, right? I'm going to read articles on the history of depression and recession. I'm going to read articles published by economists on the macro and micro effects of economic downturn for business and individuals. I'm going to read books on leading through crisis. I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to do, and all of that I look to create those stories. All of that I look to for the research that builds the thing I'm going to talk about. And then I'm also going to double click on not just our products, but all of as many of the competitors to our products as I can to figure out what the industry has to say about a thing. I over prepare that way. So that way, when a customer does ask a question or when an audience member asks a question, I'm pulling out on this like deep wealth of knowledge that I'm using to create the talking points anyhow. And it may be, I am absolutely affected by what I read on Reddit or what I read on CNN or what I read on, whatever news organization I happen to read for that morning, or the newspaper that's in the lobby, or what's on the radio in the Uber on the way in. I may change things drastically. If it's after lunch, I may change based on 3 talks I've been to that day, or the conversation I had with some person I just met over lunch, right? That sounded interesting. I may interject things from that. So I enjoy it. So I don't look at it as holy crap, that's a lot of stuff, but holy crap, that's a lot of stuff. Like, you can't do what you or I do without just an immense amount of prep. Right? And the question is, like, what does that look like to you would be my advice to our viewer, right? Which is more comfortable for you to really hone in a message, to really develop, really polish a message, and then develop that script and just really work and hone that script, knowing that, and I've seen you do it a dozen times, right? Something will come up and you'll next thing I know, that's incorporated right into your talk. But I know you've spent 5 hours getting that incorporated into your talk, right? Not 2.5 minutes, right? Or do you just do a wild and varied bunch of stuff and paddle like a maniac to try to keep up?
Absolutely not. In fact, everything you just described is things I don't do, right? So I don't do an endless amount of research. Like you describe reading upon reading upon reading upon reading, opinion. I really don't do that. I get I'm going to say a mid-level knowledge base on the topic that I think is interesting, but I'll get that with 4 or 5 different topics that may or may not actually connect. And then I spend all of my time making the connections, right? To say, how do I connect DNA storage with quantum computing? How do I connect how a CIO thinks with blockchain? How do I connect topic A to topic B to topic C and really hone a point of view, a perspective, especially if it's unique? And what I'll do is I'll spend the 5 hours actually writing down, articulating that perspective, that point of view, really fighting against it, right? To say, if somebody was going to argue the opposite side, what would they argue? And then having an answer for that argument, really double clicking on that opinion. And I might even blog on that to say, unique opinion X is this, and here's 300 angles to that, good, bad, and indifferent, and master of that particular angle. And then I incorporate that angle into talk tracks, right? I incorporate into the bigger story, right? Into the bigger narrative, wherever that makes sense. That's where I might spend my time, in the in the interaction, in the point of view, in the connecting the dots. That's where all of my time goes.
So it's interesting because you and I do the same thing, and I think it's what ultimately makes us valuable.
Mm.
And we should probably at least acknowledge it, because I don't know how to explain it. But you and I have exactly the same talent to do the same thing that is critical for what we do and makes us successful. And that is, we can see the connections in things.
Yep.
And we can do an ELI 5. We can explain that connection like the audience member is 5. Nobody walks away from our thing going, that sounded like it could have been great, but I didn't understand anything the person said.
That's right.
Neither one of us do any of that at all, right? We've become really good at taking complex things, showing how they connect and how they matter to the things that somebody cares about, and then breaking them down into small, easy to understand components. So people walk away and they go, I've never heard anybody explain data science that way. I actually understand it now. I've never heard anyone explain digital transformation that way. I actually understand it now.
Yep.
Right. And we are both really good at that. And DX is actually a perfect example, because you and I don't explain it the same way, and yet we get to the same destination and we start with the same definition.
That's right. And people walk away with an understanding that is unique, explicit, but something they will remember. Something so obvious. Now is they just turn the light on to say, oh, this makes much more sense than anything else I've ever read before.
And I would say, like, that's the advice that I would give to anyone. Like, if you're watching this and you're like, this is really interesting, how do I improve my presentation style? How do I improve the quality of my presentation? And I'll give you very precise tips here near the end. But it is, search for the connections in the material that you're talking about. And that can be connections from slide 1 to slide 7, right, within the material itself, or it can be connecting your audience to the material, which is, I would argue, better. And then explain those connections, explain the nuances of the entire thing as though the audience is 5. Don't be insulting. Just explain it as though they're coming to it for the first time. Explain it as though they don't have the hidden industry knowledge. Explain it as though acronyms are illegal. Right? And your presentation will go from 0 to 50, even if by the end of it you go, I didn't talk about anything. Because believe it or not, that means you understand what you're talking about. And if you had forgotten that not everyone has the same understanding that you did, you would have lost half the audience.
Right. Absolutely. Make the connections, understand the audience, draw the story, even if the story is multifold. Draw the story, and energy. Like, if you're not exhausted at the end of an hour, you didn't do it right. You didn't project enough energy. You didn't give enough energy to them. You weren't enthusiastic enough about the topic for you to have walked away without having to have another drink or two, having to add the electrolytes. Will never
be more than 1/10 as enthusiastic as you are.
Right.
And there's 1,000 of them. So, and it doesn't matter how big the room is. If it's you on stage, which a stage is anything where you've got a screen behind you or you're standing elevated. If you're standing and everyone else is sitting, that's a stage.
Right.
If your energy level isn't 10 times what you want their energy level to be, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
You are required to bring all of the energy.
Right. Unless it's a eulogy, right? Like, we're still talking about corporate presentations here.
But I would say even then, right? The energy you bring is still the energy that's carried in the room.
True.
So do you want everyone to be passionate about the things that you say? You better bring 10 times the passion you want them to have. Right. Like, let's be honest, if we're doing a eulogy, the point isn't to point out the exits, the bathroom, and that we'll have snacks after.
Right.
The point is to make the audience feel about that person the way you felt about that person. Right. That they suddenly get the understanding of the value of that person's place in the world. In which case, you got to be 10 times as passionate about it as they are. You may not bounce off the walls with excitement. I mean, the person's dead. But you're going to put gravitas into your speech. You're going to take a lot more pauses, right? You may have a tear or two. Like, you still have to bring that emotion. You still have to bring that passion. Right. It's just not necessarily, hello, everybody.
That's right. maybe not as many jokes. Put some jokes in, but not as many. Not a whole comedy routine.
No. And maybe make the joke stories about the person. Like,
Yeah. It does the media matter? Like, are you distinctly different, let's say, on an audio pod versus a video webinar versus in written form versus on stage versus lights on you or lights off you? Does any of that make a difference to your ultimate process?
no,
No.
not. I mean, you'd be a better judge of that than I would, but I would say not really. Like, I tend to write very similarly to how I speak, which is why I don't like the way I write. I don't think it should be done that way. I think the written word has a different level of gravitas. Plus, I rely on timbre, tone, pace, and passion in spoken word to grab the audience, right? So it's why I don't like my written as much. So I much prefer your writing to my writing.
I definitely write differently than I speak, 100%, because I don't. It's much more difficult to express enthusiasm, and the written story could be easily followed as compared to a conversation. So, like, I definitely sort of write significantly different, but I do find audio different than video. If I'm not on video, it's easier for me to be a little bit more spontaneous. In audio form, I could have something written down if I had to and use those notes to speak, versus if I'm on video in a media interview, I have to have those 20 points in my head already and be prepared to launch them when the question comes. Right? I can't look to the left and say, okay, here's the series of things that I want to be able to say to you, versus audio only. I have that capability. And therefore I could have 50 things ready instead of 20 things that I have to, have, at my disposal at any one period of time.
So I was going to tell you what I do different, but there's actually a story, if you don't mind the story.
Bring up the story.
So there is for all of the leaders, there is a test to determine whether someone should be a leader or not.
All right.
There is an absolute test in IT. It's not designed for that. That's not its purpose, but it is something worth paying attention to. There was a study done by some psychologists, a decade or more ago, where they were trying to figure out, are people any good at telling time? So if I take out all external measures of time, right? Take away your watch, take away clocks, take away your phone, all that sort of stuff. I give you a task, and then I tell you, just do that task for a set amount of time. And when you think that time is up, stop the task. Something interesting happened. And what was interesting was there was a certain group of people that was so much more proud of themselves for being exactly on time, and yet had nothing near the time. So I want to say that they said, do this task for 30 minutes.
Right.
When you think 30 minutes has passed, stop. And most people were able to go between like 22 and 35 minutes, right, for the most part. And when they stopped, they were like, I think this is about 30 minutes. Does this seem like it's about 30 minutes? And they were close enough that was considered kind of the baseline. But there was this other group of people that focused on the task and went an hour. But it wasn't just that they went an hour. It was that when they were done, they kind of crossed their arms and went, that was like 30 minutes and 30 seconds, wasn't it? Like, I'm plus or minus 25 seconds here.
Right.
But we're not even in the ballpark. I'm more accurate than the atomic clock. Like, the arrogance on their ability to tell time was paired with their inability to tell time.
Right.
And this caused, and it was almost always far over, right? And this caused a really kind of interesting thing. Why would one group of people have the exact same response and it be so alien from everyone else's response? It wasn't like one or two people. It wasn't like 1%. It was a statistically significant number of people. And so that caused them to then kind of double click and go, let's research why this happens.
Right. Why are they unique?
Right. And what they found was there is a personality type that has the ability to drop into a fugue state extremely easily. And it's a state of hyper focus. The outside world completely turns off to those people. They're just hyper focused on their task. And they do that task for however long they're going to do that task. And then it's very much like surfacing a submarine. They kind of plop into reality and go, okay, I've now completed this portion of the task. I'm now back in reality. But they can instantly drop right back into a fugue state.
I see.
And what they actually nicknamed it was engineer time, because they found almost all of those people were engineers. They had an engineer mindset. And so the reason I said they shouldn't be management leadership is because if you can find people that actually can do engineer time, they should be exceptionally well-paid, well-trained engineers for as long as you can. There's incredible value in being an individual contributor. Allow them to be an individual contributor. But that's actually me. So when you talk about these different things, I can't take a note and listen at the same time. The reason it's all the same for me is because I'm 100% focused on that thing. And it just, it's a stream in, it's a stream out. It's a stream in, it's a stream out. I don't mind being interrupted because this is the thing that I'm doing. But if somebody tries to come in the room and talk to me, even if you're talking, I won't be able to hear you at all. Couldn't hear it, couldn't understand it, couldn't follow it. I'd have to reconnect. I'm a modem effectively, right? I have to disconnect one phone call and connect another phone call. I don't do party lines. But I also kind of want to leave everyone, because we're running a little bit long here. So I want to leave everyone with some advice. And that is, if you want to be a public speaker, develop a voice. It's probably the most effective thing that you can do. You can take someone else's presentation, you can take someone else's script, you can take someone else's presenter notes, but if you don't have a voice, you won't capture the audience the way a real presenter will. And so I'm going to ask you to do two things, and two things only, to start developing that voice. The first thing is find poetry you like that sounds good when read out loud, and learn to read it so it sounds good to other people. If you don't know a poem or poet to start with, I recommend The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, because it's gorgeous and everybody knows it.
And the Simpsons version is amazing.
Say that again?
The Simpsons version is great.
Oh God, I forgot the Simpsons did the Raven did it. Now you're gonna see. This is how easy I am to get distracted. Now we're gonna...
Right. So that was number one.
So that was number one. Number two is the Bard. Shakespeare is not famous because he created stories. None of Shakespeare's stories were actually created by Shakespeare. He took stories that had been around for a long time and wrote them down. What's important about Shakespeare is the way he wrote them down. He wrote them down in what's called iambic pentameter. An iambic pentameter is a very, very specific method of writing, in the same way that there are other poetic systems are written. But what's unique about iambic pentameter is it's designed to be orated. It's designed to be spoken out loud. The pauses are built into the lines.
Right.
So pick a play that you like, pick a soliloquy that you like, and read it. And at the end of every line, take a slight pause. At the end of every piece of punctuation, add a slight pause. And if it's a question mark, turn your voice up. If it's a period, turn your voice down. End of the statement. Just do that. If you can just do that, don't memorize it, read them out loud. Just read them right from the book. If you can do those two things, you'll start to develop a voice, and that voice will help. It will absolutely transform your ability to present. Any advice that you would give?
I would still give the advice on having your point of view or perspective honed. I'm not saying write it out. I'm not even saying have the story ready, but have a point of view on a topic you think will come up. Have a perspective, and the more unique, the better. The more interesting that it has, the more you can tie it against something else, the more you can tie it to what you do every day, the more you can apply it, the better. But have that point of view. Don't just tell me a fact. That's not interesting at all. And then enthusiasm. People will feed off you, and therefore you have to project what you want people to feed.
So what I like about that is a perspective requires a story.
Right.
You can't just have a perspective, right? I think the Packers suck.
That's right. There's a reason why this perspective is true. Tell me that reason.
And that story is really interesting. I'm not a big sports guy. And I actually use the perspective to cheat on not being a sports guy. Because it's awkward sometimes. You're in a social situation, you're with a bunch of other guys, it's not business related, and they start talking about sports, and you're like, I'm not a sports guy. What do I do? So exactly what you just said. I developed a perspective on aspects of the sport that allowed me to participate in the conversation.
Right.
I still may not follow all of it, but at least I had a perspective. And so now I was part of the group.
Right.
And boy, does that make a huge difference on just about anything. It's a perspective. You should have pride in it. So do a little bit of homework.
Right.
Right. But I would say that's absolutely phenomenal advice, and probably really good advice in general. Have a perspective on things.
And it's okay to be debatable. Your job isn't to be firm in that perspective. Your job is to have one. Then allow the debate to occur. The debate is the interesting part.
Yes. Yeah. And the debate the debate is not only interesting, but it also reduces the amount of work that you actually have to do.
Right.
30 minutes in the room, and you can get a debate going for 15 of those 30 minutes. You only have to talk for 15. So you're only responsible for 15 minutes of the conversation, 15 minutes of the content.
The only thing I'd suggest, though, is don't have a superficial perspective. Really dig it, like really have something to back it up, so that when you're debating, you actually can project an air of confidence instead of just, flipping a coin. Flipping a coin does not help in that situation.
No, you really need what's known as the confidence that comes from knowing.
Right.
I am confident because I know a thing.
Right.
If you are superficial, you come across as disingenuous, and nothing will turn an audience away from you faster.
Right.
So, well, on that note, everyone, I think this was a great conversation. We went a little long, so we'll see if this turns into 1 or 2 podcasts. We'll have to let Carlos take a look at it. This is what happens when we don't have our moderator. But we hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk again next week. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.